review the fourth draft of the amendment, which is also included in your packet for this evening. We asked them to provide comments regarding that particular document, and we asked for their presence, representation here at this work session. We also sent notices to all interested persons that had expressed an interest in the topic over the past year. Also completed since May 12th, Mike Crass and I did meet with Mark Frazier, who is the Regulatory Branch Chief of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Kansas City District Office. There were really three topics that were discussed at that meeting. The first topic dealt with staff wanting to get a clear understanding of the Corps' definition of a stream, to make sure that we understood how they as an organization were defining a stream. In simple terms, the stream needs to have an ordinary high water mark, it needs to have channel scouring, and it needs to have a stream bed and bank. We also discussed the Corps' jurisdictional determination process, both the preliminary process, which is really an opt-in process for a landowner, as well as the approved jurisdictional determination process. Again, since we refer to that in our ordinance, we wanted to make sure we had an understanding of how the Corps handles that overall process. And thirdly, we talked about master development agreements, which is a concept that we are proposing to add into this amendment, which is a specific agreement between the city and a landowner on how that landowner would address the needs for stream buffer protection upon their property, as well as potential mitigation that may need to occur on their property. And we are interested in finding out what value that had to the Corps. If it's something we are requiring, is it something that if a landowner was to impact a stream, would the Corps look upon the terms of that agreement as being beneficial in their review of deciding what kind of mitigation would occur on that property? And it did appear as if it would have value if it got to that point where a landowner did have to do mitigation. If they had an approved plan in place with the city, it would be something the Corps would look at it. And the benefit of that is to have, if there is mitigation to occur, is to have the mitigation occur on site rather than off site, in a land bank or something of that nature. So it did appear as if the proposal for the development agreements does have value to the Corps. Also occurring since May 12th, we did receive written comments from Ruth Wallace, who is the Municipal Stormwater Program Coordinator with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. She provided comments through a couple of emails she sent to the city. We also received comments from representatives of Region 7 of the Environmental Protection Agency. And all those comments were included in your packet for this evening. Staff also met with representatives of the Good Ranch, which is one of the MOU's defined properties, and to discuss a proposed master development agreement for that subdivision. We also prepared the fourth draft of the proposed amendments, again included in your packet this evening, and this fourth draft does incorporate comments and suggestions that were made from the agencies and individuals as appropriate. One of the important elements of the stream buffer protection ordinance is the definition of a stream. That's really the critical basis of what we're talking about here, is having a clear definition of a stream. I do find it interesting that neither the Watershed Management Plan or even the APWA 5600 guidelines do not define a stream. So we really have to look to other sources for a definition of a stream. And one of the concerns specifically that's been expressed on the proposed amendments has been the shift from reliance on the stream border map that the city of Raymore has to determine where stream buffers are required, to the use of a definition of a regulated stream, which is provided by the Army Corps of Engineers. And again, according to the Corps, a regulated stream will have an ordinary high water mark, a channel scour, and channel bed and bank. It is the Corps of Engineers who's charged with the responsibility of protecting the public interest in the waters of the United States. And this is accomplished through a very well-established permitting process. And the fact that the Corps has this defined method and process for identifying regulated streams is why staff is most comfortable with utilizing the Corps identification of regulated streams as the basis for determining where stream buffers need to be located. There are other options for determining stream definition. we could craft a local definition of a stream if we wanted to as a city. We certainly could continue to utilize the stream order map that we have in place. But there are concerns with utilizing the stream order map that staff has on the accuracy of that map. And if we get into that discussion, we can provide some examples of where there is concern and why we have concern with using the stream order map as the basis for determining where the buffers occur. We as staff do recommend, again, what we consider a well-defined, it's a very black and white definition the Corps has for a stream. Simply put, if the Corps has jurisdiction over a stream, then the stream buffer must be provided. If they don't have jurisdiction, no stream buffer is provided. It's either a regulated stream or it's not. It's just a very clear line, we believe, that the city can utilize. The fourth draft, again, that's submitted to you this evening. It is the most recent attempt by city staff to prepare code language that balances the environmental concerns and property owner rights. Staff has tried to incorporate various comments made by the different officials and interested persons. A few of the changes we've made and incorporated into the fourth draft, and these changes are what has occurred since your May 12th public hearing. We simplified the applicability section, trying to eliminate any confusion or conflicting statements that were made back at your May 12th meeting. We are now requiring a letter of jurisdictional determination from the Corps of Engineers to be provided for any property proposed for development. Required annual maintenance plan and restoration plan as part of the buffer plan, and the way the buffers are measured would be from the top of the bank instead of the stream center line. Then in closing, staff does believe the proposed amendments to the stream buffer protection provisions to establish the balance that's necessary between environmental concerns and property owner rights. We believe the adopted code provisions must allow for development to occur in a reasonable manner. And based upon that, staff recommends that the fourth draft submitted to you this evening be included in a bill that would be presented to the council for action at your upcoming August 25th meeting, which will be a public hearing. That's going to conclude staff comments at this time. And again, Mike Crass, I would be available for any questions you would have.
Councilmember Westcott.
Here is my primary concern. You know, there are several three-letter government agencies who have quite a big stick that they can hit us with. And, you know, many of them like to exercise their power, and I don't necessarily agree with them or disagree with them. Does this draft actually address the concerns of those agencies where it mitigates any fines, lawsuits, or anything else that could possibly happen to the city?
Sir, we like to think so. Here's the problem, and why that statement is maybe a little flippant. As is evidenced by the fact that the agencies aren't here tonight but do provide comments, they see that as their role until they are called in to make a determination that could lead to one of the actions that you just now described. In short, they will provide comments, but they will not provide approval or disapproval of anything that we do until after the fact.
If I may follow up. So the comments that they've provided, this current draft does address the comments that were issued by, was it Ms. Wallace, I believe it was, who sent us the email. I mean, do we address all of her concerns within this current draft?
We believe we made the best attempt possible in doing that. I mean, we don't know that. We won't know that probably until that formal review would occur after we submit, you know, everything for the permit. But we believe we have attempted to address all of our concerns.
Jay, did I see your hand up? Okay. Go ahead.
If I may. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the other important thing is that what really guides a lot of this is our discharge permit. And our discharge permit says we need to protect water quality from new development to the maximum extent practicable. That's allowed by law. This ordinance, the ordinance changes we are proposing is bringing in over 1,700 acres of land into coverage by the stream buffer ordinance that were not covered in the 2008 permit. So yeah, I think that does meet the requirements of applying this to as much property as practical.
And then I just, as a side note, I found it humorous when you mentioned that the Army Corps of Engineers has the duty to protect and, the waters, and weren't they responsible a couple of years ago for the release of water upstream that destroyed millions of dollars of crops and levees and homes here in the state of Missouri? I had to chuckle when that was mentioned.
Other questions to staff at this time? Okay, we'll open the floor for public comment. Please come over here, use the mic, identify yourself for the record, and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Sorry. Good evening. I won't take up a lot of time restating all of my concerns regarding the proposed changes to the Raymore Stream Buffer Protection Ordinance. Instead, I would like to just point out that the City Council asked that the city staff provide their proposed Stream Buffer Protection Ordinance changes to the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, DNR, for their consideration and comment. The city staff was also asked why Raymore was being looked at by the DNR and the EPA. The City of Raymore must apply for a municipal separate storm sewer system MS4 permit, which is administered by the DNR and is enforced by the EPA. It is the city's intention to use the Stream Buffer Protection Ordinance to fulfill part of the requirements for that MS4 permit. The DNR has responded that the proposed changes do not fulfill the requirements for the MS4 permit. The DNR recommended that the city look to Raymore's 2006 Watershed Management Plan for the information necessary to write an effective stream buffer protection ordinance. I won't go into all the details of the comments from the DNR, as each of you has received those comments. I would, however, like to emphasize a couple of critically important points. First, there is the question of restricting the stream buffer protection ordinance to only those streams which fall under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers. The DNR was very clear in stating that if the city exempts properties which are outside the purview of the Corps of Engineers, the stream buffer ordinance will not aid the city in complying with the MS4 permit requirements. The DNR went on to explain the differences between the requirements of the DNR and those of the Army Corps of Engineers. In short, most if not all the first and second order streams in Raymore would be exempt from the stream buffer protection ordinance if it is only applied to streams which fall under the jurisdiction of the Corps of Engineers, and the DNR stated that the first and second order streams are critical to the health of the entire watershed, and the protection of the water quality of those first and second order streams is a necessary and important part of the MS4 permit requirements. The DNR recommended that the city look to the stream map and stream order chart contained within the Raymore Watershed Management Plan to identify those streams which need stream buffer protection. The next critical point concerns the exemption for agriculture. The DNR pointed out that the agricultural exemption must comply with federal regulation 40 CFR 122.3E and F. Simply stated, there are very specific agricultural practices which qualify for exemption from a stream buffer ordinance, and the ordinance should indicate that fact. The last point I would like to make is that the DNR stated that stream buffer protection and post-construction runoff control are not an either-or situation. The city needs both an effective stream buffer protection ordinance as well as a post-construction runoff control ordinance. This also means that simply because the developer enters into a post-construction runoff control agreement does not eliminate the need to provide stream buffer protection. Again, it is not an either-or situation. I would respectfully request that the City Council consider the comments from the DNR and direct the city staff to draft a stream buffer protection ordinance which incorporates the information contained within Raymore's Watershed Management Plan, which contains the Raymore stream map, and eliminate all references to the Corps of Engineers. I would further ask that the exemption for agricultural purposes, Section A1D, be clearly defined to be in line with the federal definition. And finally, I would ask that the exemption for post-construction runoff control, Section A1C be removed from the stream buffer protection ordinance. Thank you.
My name is David Flick. I believe the stream buffer ordinance that you have in front of you represents a great balance between environmental protection and the need of property owners to develop their land in a fashion that's both environmentally responsible and economically viable. It's very important to realize that if you choose to protect every possible drainage of water in linear wetlands, the result will be a decrease in net to development acres. Demand stays the same, net development reduces. The result is very clear. It is called urban sprawl. It takes more acres of land to provide the same number of lots for housing and businesses. So in looking at these types of efforts are very difficult. Staff has commented that they have met with the industry leaders. You've met with the chief of the Army Corps of Engineers. They've provided input. The buffer ordinance in front of you tonight integrates many of those additional changes. Oftentimes, exemptions that deal with agriculture steps into legal quagmires between rights of farming and what's exemption. But once again, the regulations in the Clean Water Act provide specific guidance for what farmers can do and can't do. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. And we won't count it in your 3 minutes. Yeah.
I'm short enough, I can come up here, I think. And we don't need to take up any more time. Hi, I'm Sharon LaRussa, and I have a couple comments tonight. I really didn't prepare anything specifically, but what I have already stated to you before, you're all familiar with. I'm not going to repeat any of that. I'm not here to hug any trees. I'm not here to try to save the water or anything else. I'm just trying to get to the point where everyone is, which is to get a ordinance that meets the criteria for the purpose, which is to meet the city's requirements. And I think, you know, when we can incorporate those from the environmental aspect, the developer aspect, that's wonderful. But the real criteria that the city needs to meet, and cost the city if we don't, which is the taxpayers' money, is meeting the criteria that is set out from the different agencies. The Corps of Engineers has some wonderful things that they do, and they do protect the waters of the United States, which strictly is the waters within the stream banks. The ordinance for stream buffers protects the area outside the stream, and that pertains to the runoff that it's coming off the properties. So within the fourth draft, I have found and gone through with my scribbles the different points that I found within the comments from the DNR and the EPA. And I have all that written up. If anybody wants a copy tonight, I'd be glad to give them a copy. I'm not going to bore you with all of them. I'm just going to give you some highlights. And that is basically that the DNR said that if they use the jurisdictional determination as one of the criteria for applicability, that it will not meet their criteria for the MS4 permit. They also had words to say about the portion which is A1C, which pertains to post-development water quality. They also had comments specifically for the agricultural that have already been mentioned. They had an area that they suggested deleting, which was A2. On the number C2, C2A, which is the chart, the EPA commented that they felt that the buffer amounts should be different, would be better. And also on C2D, they stated that that area is vaguely defined, so they felt that the geomorphic study needed to be better adapted. And then on, that would be C3, the EPA said this is not a good change and suggests leaving it alone as it was, and that's the part pertaining to changing from what it said was, in no case shall the buffer be less than the floodplain, to changing it to say the buffer shall not be greater than the floodplain. And they said that's a very large difference. And then in addition, I had just two statements to make, and that was that when it comes to saying the Director of Public Works shall approve, I kind of feel that there should be some kind of criteria stated what the director will be using to make that determination that it's okay. Because what happens if directors change or that authority is delegated? What one person decides is okay may not be what somebody else is, and to be consistent with everybody, I've just felt it would be a good idea. And then my last thing that I actually found is we have the buffer chart in here on C12A to give you the order buffer widths, but we have no way to get to that. We do not reference the stream map, which sets the order up, and we do not mention how to determine those widths from that storm map, that stormwater.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comments?
I'm Larry O'Donnell with the Little Blue River Watershed Coalition. This has been a long, drawn-out process. The first ordinance that was passed, at the time we made comments to you, told you it was not going to fly. DNR would not accept it. You got by with it for several years. They told you it doesn't fly. They told you what's wrong with it. They've told you what's wrong with the proposed ordinance right now, and you're not listening to them. They will not pass your permit if you don't do what they tell you to do. It's plain and simple. I mean, what are we talking about? You've got the management plan, you know your stream order, but we kept backpedaling and backpedaling. At what? We're talking about how much flooding is okay to subject the citizens of Raymore to, so that we can have a little bit more development that may or may not help us. It'll actually put a hindrance on us, because as we know, the property tax from housing is not what pays for our services. It's all that sales tax that comes with that. I recommend you seriously look at DNR's recommendations and incorporate them into the ordinance.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I just have one comment. From the people I've talked to, I disagree with knowing the stream. It seems to me, I've talked to several different people, all of them are required to determine what the stream order is, but they all have different definitions, so we really don't know the stream order. The fellow that was the consultant the first time, I go back to that cow path. He determined a cow path was as first order stream. Well, a cow path is gonna carry water down it in a big rain, but it's not a stream. There's a big thing in this definition of what the stream order is. And I don't know how you get around it. I don't know who defines that. I know that the fellow that defined the streams in the first thing, and I brought that up to him during our work session. I disagreed with him, and I still disagree with him. I look at on tracts of ground that we have that are either farmed or in pasture. I go through the stream, and I'll ride those pastures and look at them and how they're determined. And if you take that particular definition, you can eliminate 40 to 50% of the property to stream buffer. But there's no stream there. Now, I don't know, if you want, I'll take you all out and drive you the pastures and show you what's determined as a stream and what isn't. Under that definition, I can give you another guy's definition, and it'll be completely different. Now, I don't know how we get around that. I agree with you in one thing. It would be nice to find out what that definition is and stick to it, whatever it is. But truthfully, I don't know how to do that. Those fellows we had to come in from Columbia, they defined stream completely different than those guys, from. They both do the same work for all kinds of places. It's just a problem I have. I don't know how you deal with it.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, we'll go ahead and close the public comment, and I'll turn it over to our attorney. Here, have a mic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a difficult, long process for the city staff. I've worked closely with Mr. Kress and Mr. Cataret, working through the different versions, and I believe that, in summary, what Mr. Flick was saying, what we have here is a balance. I don't think we will ever make the development community happy with regulating and bringing in 1,700 more acres of land to the ordinance, and we're not going to make the environmental community apparently happy unless you would stop everything that looked like a proposed possible stream under their former plan. The city is ahead of most cities in trying to regulate in this difficult issue, and I think that the ordinance as proposed is well thought out. I think the core definition was a good one to use with respect to streams. We have to have some definition from somewhere, and at least that one's defensible. There's been no litigation in this area. There's been no case law for me to point you to and say this will be safe. I cannot speak to my colleague, Mr. Westcote or Mr. Moorhead, and make them absolutely safe that we won't be subject later to governmental intervention or second guessing what you get from them, or some large statements with large S but not specifics. So working within what the direction we've got, staff's tried to make a balanced product. I think the exemptions for final plats, unexpired preliminary plats, and well negotiated out development agreements that meet stormwater runoff and stream setback requirements are reasonable, good exemptions that avoid a takings claim, that if we just put it in per se as it was under 2008 standards, that development would rightfully come at us and say we were taking away valuable property rights and the number of lots impacted. I would have to defer to the staff to speak to whether or not how we're going to go about our MS4 permits. And I did take note of the agricultural exemptions, and we should look to make sure that those do come in line with sections 122E and F of the federal regulations with respect to same, and I have not examined that. But I don't think anything needs to be struck, as was suggested by some of the speakers. I think the basic outlines and applicability are well thought out and well done. but would defer to Mr. Krass to discuss the city's responsibilities with respect to permitting, and to Mr. Carteret with anything further on stream definition or how we got to these stream setback measurements. But what I will say is, in viewing it in the total global picture, is that it's a balanced product, attempting to take in all the input we've received from the development community, from which we continue to negotiate with, by the way, with the environmental community, and with the government regulations. I did read, and there are some summary statements similar from Ms. Wallace that she's made in her report that candidly staff takes issue with, and tried to get her to clarify and modify and discuss further, but haven't been totally successful in that regard that Mr. Krass has tried to do, and he can explain on further if you wish. But if you want a summary statement from me, I believe the fourth draft as done is legally defensible and does represent 6 months or 9 months hard work by your staff in trying to put something before you that is a product that I'm proud of on their behalf.
Questions for, we're going to have to share the mic. Questions, Councilmember Holman, and then Councilmember Westcoat, and then Councilmember Moorhead.
I actually have two, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, one for Mr. Krass.
As long as
one
they're
for
short,
Mr. Kettering.
easy.
The first one,
answer.
somebody would have probably beaten me to, but obviously a couple of our speakers, Mr. Krass addressed a separate but related issue in regards to the MS4 permitting and some issues that may rely on this. I'd kind of like to hear your thoughts on that, just Joe, related to us.
The only guidance we have with regards to, although the DNR did provide some comments, and what they feel makes a good stream buffer ordinance, what we rely on is the requirements of the permit. Permit says policies and ordinance that provide requirements and standards to direct growth to identified areas, protect sensitive areas such as wetlands and riparian areas, and so that's kind of summarizing what we are talking about. We are talking about protecting riparian areas. State statute doesn't dictate what stream buffers should be. The DNR, when I spoke with Ruth, they did not have a definition of a stream. They referred us back to our watershed management plan, but I'll let Jim kind of talk a little bit about how the stream order map was developed. When I did talk to Ruth about the master agreements, and I explained to her would be a comprehensive agreement, that the intent was that it would meet the requirements of our permit and all of our provisions with regards to mitigating stormwater impacts from development. She felt then that had addressed her concerns about the comprehensive development agreements.
If I might dovetail onto that, in several sections, she does make the comment, and the LaRussas are absolutely correct. She makes the comment that neither the original draft of this nor this would go far enough to achieve DNR approval for the MS4 permit. But when you read on in that sentence, it's because it needs to be in tandem with a stormwater runoff ordinance.
You had a follow-up?
You can hear me, can't you? Can we just do it back? Mr. Carteret, I've been accused of this before, and I'll have to admit to it. Been through this each time we've looked at it, and I'll have to admit it's kind of like college. I pick up a lot, but sometimes I'm kind of like, boy, calculus again. I've kind of lost this here. If you could, would you mind giving me just kind of a high-level summary of the changes from the time we first saw this and the first product to what we've seen here. Not all of it. I mean, obviously, there's a lot here, and like I said, I have read through it, but I think it would kind of help refresh my memory. I do a lot better in a face-to-face with a lecture scenario.
Probably the biggest change, I would say the biggest change from what was the third draft you saw at the May 12th meeting, which is the draft that the Planning and Zoning Commission made its recommendation on. What we did was heard the public comments made during that meeting, comments regarding the readability of the overall document, comments about maybe some conflicting language. And so we did focus a lot on the applicability section. The very first page, you'll see quite a few changes that we made to that to try to simplify the wording, to try to make it just very pointed as far as where the section applies and what the exemptions are. So that was probably the biggest change we made. Again, on the first page, we specifically added the requirement of the jurisdictional determination. We felt if a landowner comes into the city and they have an idea, they want to develop the property, the first step they need to take is we need to determine where the regulated streams are located at. Before we get into looking at their layout of streets and all the other amenities they want to provide, we need to find out what we're working with, and the only way to do that is to get this jurisdictional determination, to have some idea where are the regulated streams. So we added that requirement from your May 12th meeting. A minor change, we added the requirement for the annual maintenance plan, or clarified the requirement for the annual maintenance plan and restoration plan. Those had to be required as part of the buffer plan. And then we simply changed how we measure the setbacks. Rather than go for the center line of the stream, we went from top of bank. Those are really the changes we've made since May 12th.
Thank you.
Councilmember Westcoat, followed by Moorhead.
You know, I also have a couple questions, but I'd like to start off by saying, you know, it's important that we address the EPA and the DNR, but, you know, let's be honest, if they had their ability, you know, in Colorado, the state is making claim now to water that falls from the sky, you know, to which I think is absurd. And if the government, if they were given a chance, they'd claim our tiers, if they had the ability to do it. I like the fact that the staff has tried to prepare a balanced approach to address both of the issues. Where does this version fall in best practices relating to other municipalities of our size?
I get cursory review of other ordinances, the APWA ordinance, model ordinances that are on the EPA website and other such websites. I think we fall right in line with those ordinances and those ordinance requirements. All of the ordinances that I have reviewed, including Lenexa's that Ms. Wallace refers to, has some acknowledgement of the Corps' permitting process that allows landowners to exercise their rights under the Clean Water Act to fill or move or impact streams. They all contain exemptions depending on the jurisdiction, has different names for things, but basically a preliminary plat, unexpired preliminary plat, preliminary plan, final plat. They all have those type of exemptions for recognizing prior approvals prior to enacting the ordinance. With regards to the buffer widths, I think each entity is a little different depending on whether or not they've done a comprehensive study of their watershed as we had, or they fall back on default stream buffers. But I think for those entities that we have reviewed, we fall right in line with their requirements.
And then, you know, much of the time legislation, you know, develops over time. Just like our UDC, it's more of a living, breathing document because, you know, it changes. Does this plan serve as a solid foundation from which we can move forward from if we have to make changes in the future? Does this serve as a platform that allows us to do that?
Yes, it is. As I said, it currently meets the the requirements of our permit, and if those permit requirements change, then we will have to tweak the ordinance a little bit. But as I said, it falls in line with many of the model ordinances we reviewed.
Councilmember Moorhead?
And I'll piggyback on that because, with a statement, because that was my concern, is we've been kind of stalled out here making this amendment. My position is we should go ahead and implement it, even if it's deficient. It's better than what we currently have sitting. We can always subsequently make changes. To Mr. Carteret and Mr. Crass, I'm concerned about Ms. Wallace's comments from July 2nd. This is the most comprehensive set of remarks that I've seen from her, but I'm even struggling to understand some of the logic here, so help me out here. Specifically pointing to section 4A sub 2, when she is stating that we can employ a model ordinance that we can find on the EPA website, is this proposal in conflict with that recommendation? Are we not following a similar model ordinance?
No, as I stated, we are. I have reviewed that ordinance, and it does, as I said, the pretty much the framework of these ordinances defer to or acknowledge that certain actions are allowable under the Clean Water Act with regards to impacting waters of the U.S. And we agree that the court has jurisdiction from basically the top of bank to the channel. But if a property owner has a right to apply for a permit, go through their public input process, and alter or fill in a stream. And this ordinance and all the ordinances I've reviewed recognize that and allow that to occur. They also have exemptions for pre-existing approvals, whether they call it a preliminary plan or some other type of things. They all have those type of clauses in it. They don't specify stream buffers because or buffer widths, because that's kind of an insert here in those model ordinances. So as I read through her comments, and I read through them again, and I read through the watershed management plan, and I looked at our ordinance, I was having a hard time lining her comments up with where we are really deviating from the our watershed management plan in crafting our stream buffer ordinance.
Well, and I appreciate, because I'm having the same problem. If you look at subsection 3, when you're looking at terminology, she's saying the phrase, the city can emulate the most effective type of stream buffer ordinance currently being employed in the region, citing city of Lenexa. She's not saying we should do city of Lenexa's. She would then say the word must or shall. She says we can, but then when I look back at the proposal under section C2A, we are in fact employing the exact same type of effective type of buffer ordinance that she later says we are not. So many of her remarks are contradictory. Her language doesn't fit her recommendations. And I apologize, there is a question here, but I'll slip to subsection B on the post-construction runoff control ordinance. Mr. Fairborn, you mentioned that this was recommended because we are to be in tandem. This ordinance is to be in tandem. With the 7 recommendations provided there, I've looked through, and aren't those addressed in our proposed ordinance? So in fact, are we not, I mean, this is slightly rhetorical, but in essence, we are complying with the things she is saying we're not complying with, and yet, so I think this is a ridiculous response by the DNR. I do not concur with Ms. Wallace. I don't think it's phrased properly. I think we're totally in compliance.
It's like Jeopardy, we're all trying to get to the button. Mr. Mayor, if I may. Staff recognizes that there is a companion component and companion requirement to this stream buffer or protecting riparian corridors in the permit. In fact, we have drafted a water quality ordinance and presented it to the Planning Commission and is working through their process.
Other comments or questions? Councilmember Abdul-Gawad?
When I was looking at this, my number one concern, and the reason that we sent this back to work session was because primarily it's our job as a council to meet the requirements of EPA and DNR. And so when I was at home looking through the packet, looking through the comments that we got on paper from EPA and DNR, and looking at the code, you can see my paper. I was like, wait a minute, they said this, but it's not changed, and they said this, but it's not changed, and they said this, but it's not changed. And so just going with my scribbles and trying to look at all of the notes from them, finally I sat down and was like, okay, I'm gonna do my own copy with the strike-throughs so that I can see, and it turned out green and red for some reason, what they're trying to say. So if anybody's interested in a copy of what I read in the DNR and EPA comments, you are welcome to take one as it goes around. But when I read through it, my initial concern, let me find my notes here so I can be sure I cover everything, was the definition of first and second order streams. I know when we very, very first started talking about this, one of the big questions was, EPA says that first and second order streams are very important. Does the Corps have jurisdiction over those? Because initially it was just, let's see what the Corps has jurisdiction over, and they can get a permit from the Corps if they need to, otherwise it falls back on our stream ordinance. But we were told by staff then that most of the first and second order streams didn't fall under the Corps jurisdiction. So I'm concerned, reading comments from the EPA that say that first and second order streams are very important, that putting it in the hands of the Corps is not going to cover that requirement from them. In my opinion, these suggestions from the EPA and DNR are not optional. I think that they're saying these are the things that we need to see in your ordinance, and like I said, when I was reading through, there are things that I didn't see. And I know, and you guys know from the people who live in Raymore that you talk to in your ward, that our taxpayers don't want us to spend their tax money on fines from DNR and EPA. So, starting at the top, if you want to go through with me, the first section I was concerned about was when Ruth Wallace said that the DNR does not recommend limiting streams to under just the Corps jurisdiction, that it will not aid the city in complying with MS4 permit requirements. And I know staff kind of addressed that, but in my opinion, in black and white in her email, it says that. So it seems like our ordinance should not strike out that part. It should include that's part of it. I know that there were concerns on us having too many exemptions. The notes from EPA almost seemed like making fun. Why don't you just say what did it say, what it doesn't apply to instead of what it does, or the other something. It might be shorter to say when it does apply instead of all the areas it doesn't apply to, so it's almost like they were saying you're exempting too much, and that's what started this whole entire process, was that we are exempting too much land. Staff keeps saying that we put so many more acres back into the plan, but we've also taken out protection for those first and second order streams, and I think that that's not going to satisfy the requirements of what DNR and EPA are wanting us to do. The Department of Natural Resources said we need both the development agreement containing provisions for post-development water quality and best management practices and a stream buffer. They are not the same thing. So I think making under A1C, making that exempt is not an option. As someone mentioned, I think we really need to look at the federal requirements for agriculture. So I noted that on there, that we need to make a reference to what those, or at least look at what the federal agriculture exemptions are, because I think it's a little too broad to just say land being used for agriculture. Looks like when I copied and pasted that, some of the numbers got messed up, so sorry, it's a little hard to follow. Identifying stream segments based on the Corps of Engineers, I don't think or writing the letter. I wondered who writes the letter. Does the developer write the letter? Does the city write the letter? How much time does that take to hear back from the Corps? That was just a question that I had. I'm trying to kind of just hit the highlights. Under C, the design standards for stream buffers, I wonder, does the Corps tell us when we hear back from them with, is it a jurisdictional stream or not? Is that gonna tell us a stream order? If not, where do we get that stream order? Do we go back to the stream order map in our watershed management plan? If we're going back there to begin with, why don't we just stay there? Why do we even go to the Corps? Let's just go with the stream orders on our map. The city years ago spent lots of money researching that, had lots of qualified people come in and do all kinds of studies. I don't understand why it seems like we're kind of scrapping that plan. Ms. Wallace from DNR and EPA both were concerned about our width of stream buffers. Ms. Wallace recommended 100 feet on the first order instead of 50, and said going up from there, EPA was concerned that there wasn't enough space between our second order and third order stream. We only got a difference of 10 feet there. EPA even recommended that we go 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300. And so it's just little things like that that very simply are in these emails in black and white, that when I was going through this draft, I wasn't seeing what EPA and DNR wanted. And again, in my opinion, that's who we need to be making happy right now. And so those were the things I was looking for reading through this. The last major change was the default setback in the geomorphic study. Ms. Wallace from DNR said that was really vague. She didn't understand that. That what kind of qualifications are those people going to have? And so I wondered, should we just take it out? And again, that was done when we did the water management plan. We had people come and do that for the city, so why do we need to allow for other people to come in with their own study? Just like, you can find somebody that'll tell you anything's true or spout any statistics that can prove any point. If we've already had an expert come into the city and do this study for us, I don't understand why we want to open that up for people to come in with their own study to try to prove their point.
Well, I'll ask staff to answer your question, then we'll go to
Can
council.
I say one more?
Well, you've had the floor for 10 minutes.
I thought I was on my last thing. One more thing was the part where the EPA said that the buffer shall not be greater than the floodplain, and the EPA commented that this seemed like a big change, and so I'm a little bit concerned that big change, in their words, is maybe not going to satisfy their requirements. Like I said, that's my primary concern, and I didn't feel like that was what I saw here.
Okay, I'll ask staff to respond to your questions, and then it goes to Councilmember Westcoat and followed by Moorhead.
If I could kind of frame the two questions that I think you asked, and the rest were probably comments on why don't we change. I think I heard you ask the question of who actually approaches the Corps for the determination and how that process occurs, and why don't we just use the stream order map that we have. We paid quite a bit to have that done, and we did. So I'm going to ask staff to address both of those.
If I can, I'll start with the stream order map, because I identified that in the opening comments. I just have a one-page handout. If you take a look at it, it's being passed around. I think at this stage, it is important to maybe give a little bit more explanation as to why staff has concerns with the stream order map. The stream order map was done as part of, again, our watershed master plan back in 2006. It's important to understand how that map was actually created, because I think that's where the ambiguity comes in staff's mind when we look at this map and try to actually apply it to the field, if you would. It's been talked about by Mr. Good about Cow Pass being identified as stream order, and how that occurred is through the process of how we created this map. The map was really done, it's prepared, it's utilizing a computer model, it was GIS software. It was not actual field verification on where streams are located. There were sample points taken after the map had been created to verify parts of the map, but it was utilized by a computer model. And what they did, they utilized basically satellite sensed elevation data, They used a digital elevation model. It was used to create a mosaic of 10 meter by 10 meter tiles. Yeah, that's 32 foot by 32 foot. And what they did with that tile is then they placed an elevation point for that tile. Then they moved on to the next tile, placed one elevation point for that entire 32 foot by 32 foot area. And they created a mosaic of the entire city. What the GIS software then did, it interpolated that data to create the stream order definition. After that was completed, it was then that the field verification was done, but they only did it on 70 points throughout the entire city. So it wasn't, you can't say that this stream order map was field verified. It's a depiction of what could be there. It needs further analysis in order to actually utilize it to create a stream buffer and to say that's actually what is there. The stream order map itself, one of the issues, yes, we adopted it as part of the 2008 ordinance. It hasn't been tested. There has not been a preliminary plat submitted to where we actually, as a city, could look at it and see, well, how accurate is it to an actual development plan that we have submitted? It's actually never been used for that purpose. I want to point out the concern that we have, again, just using one example, but I think it's a very common property. Everybody's familiar with it. Everybody knows where the property's at. I selected the property that's in the Willowwind Shopping Center. It's a small tract. It's owned by the Raymore Christian Church. It's right there at the northeast corner of 58 Highway and Peace Drive. So I included an aerial photograph of the property so you know which lot I'm talking about. On the back side of this page, I've then taken a clip from the stream order map and illustrated it. And what it shows is that on that particular piece of property, you'll see 2 segments of stream order 1 and a stream order 2 on that particular property. What you see in the white is the actual buffer area that would be required if we followed the stream order map. Then took a photograph of the property, and we've all seen the property. We've all been by it. You know where it is. There is no stream on that property in any way, shape, or form. And that's just one example, but it points to the concern that staff has as to why are we not utilizing the stream order map to define where the buffer should be, because that's not really what it's intended to do. It's intended to be a depiction of what could be out in the field. Then you go and do the actual field verification to determine what is there, and then you do the classification based on that. So that's really why we haven't, again, continued with our thought of making the buffers apply based upon the stream order map.
Mike, do you want to talk to the process that the ordinance calls for then? If somebody were to come out and say, okay, well, the stream order map, or I'm going to develop this piece of property, what they have to do?
I'd like to back up just a second, Jim, and talk about the stream orders, because everyone seems to be addressing that. Really, what the stream order is an identification of the tributaries that are shown on the map. So a single tributary is a first order stream. Second order stream is where 2 first order streams come together. But nowhere in this document does it describe the characteristics of a stream. And that's really what we're talking about. What characteristics does a stream have to have in order for it to be a stream? And that, as Jim illustrated, I think a lot of the first order streams that are shown, some of them probably do have stream characteristics of a ordinary high water mark, a defined bank, a defined bed. A lot of them, though, are quite frankly probably grass swales in a field that really aren't a stream. And so that's what we're trying to narrow down, is what are the characteristics of a stream that need to be protected. And Jim, your question was?
A long time ago. Was how do we, what process does the ordinance call? I go out, I buy 200 acres, I want to develop it, I own it, what do I have to do? Can you put that in black and white?
Sure.
The way
Currently the way the ordinance is drafted is that they would do a preliminary jurisdictional determination, and that is based on utilizing the definition that the Army Corps of Engineers uses to identify streams in the field. And as Jim stated, streams need to have a bank and a channel and a defined bed. So the purpose would be, what they would do is go and do a detailed study of their property and identify the streams on site that meet that definition. Again, people keep referencing back to the watershed management plan. Watershed management plan also contemplated a more detailed study than the stream order map in the variance section. It says a site map that includes locations of all streams, wetlands, floodplain boundaries, and other natural features as determined by field survey. So it contemplated a greater level of detail and information being presented and prepared during the development process than was done as preparation of the stream order map. So again, as drafted, the determination would be made on the property what streams meet that criteria. If the developer proposes to impact those streams, that would be then follow the Clean Water Act process to alter, move, fill the streams as under their rights under the Clean Water Act. Then whatever streams are left, the buffer ordinance would apply to, and then development would occur from there.
Joe, you wanted to step in there?
I don't want to, but I think the job requires. I think in the desire for flexibility and to minimize the possibility of legal attack from takings claims, which the EPA and the DNR will not protect us from if you err on that side. Let me assure you, when you're only worried about pleasing them, I would suggest there's several groups you need to think about, if not pleasing, meeting the legal requirements for it. And that's why section exemption 2 for approved unexpired preliminary plats is in this. That's why, if we can reach a development agreement with provisions for post-water quality mitigation and best management practices, we want to have that in there. I commented that we can look at the agricultural exemptions, and it seems to me that a geomorphic study, even though Ms. Wallace may not understand what it is, Mr. Grass can articulate it for you, would be much better than leaving an abstract piece of work which doesn't seem to relate largely to reality, as Mr. Carteret has pointed out to you in many specific instances, that we put a flexible approach. We put the burden on the developer each time it comes in to create such a study or to get Corps approval or to show and convince Mr. Crass that they can exempt first and second order streams or whatever they're trying to exempt for purposes of development, either because they don't exist or they're not important in this particular instance under this limited narrow facts. That's the flexibility we're trying to keep, and why there were some exemptions and why this geomorphic study was suggested. Maybe Mr. Crass should explain it in more detail, but I am very concerned to just take all these sections out as indicated and indicate this study from whenever shall always be the model for what the streams are going to be for this city in a total vacuum where they didn't even go out and learn where they are. Very dangerous precedent to be using. So I suggest that's why this staff has struggled with this and tried to give you a more balanced product, and candidly from my side, a more flexible product, so that on a case-by-case basis we can look at developments, enter a win-win development agreement. The distrust of the public, that the public works head can't review these things or do this, or they don't know who the next one's going to be, I find to be a very ill-placed and illogical argument. We don't always know who the different people are going to be here, but you trust that they're going to do the right thing, and we hire people with education and competence to review such technical things, because candidly, we as council, whenever we can't do the technical thing, we rely on their best recommendation when those issues come before you. So those are some of my thoughts about some of the proposed revisions being suggested here.
Thank you, Joe. Councilmember Westcoat, then Moorhead.
I wanted to start off with a statement, and then I have a question. First of all, I want to thank our legally trained minds for your review. Pointing out the conflicts even within the DNR's letter, I feel is important. I have a several professional licenses, and, you know, I answer to regulatory bodies, and they say, you shall not do this, or you can do this. You know, anytime I hear regulatory bodies use, well, it seems like, or it feels, that tells me that they're operating from opinion and not fact. So when they start doing that, that is of great concern. You know, when the EPA says, well, it seems like, no, either you're operating from fact and you say, this is, or you shouldn't be opening or making any statements, you know, because apparently there's no case law for them to cite. So the fact that we've put together a balanced plan that's legally defensible, I feel that it's a good starting point and we need to move forward. The question that I have is, you know, we currently have a farming amendment on our ballot in August. And does that change even what the EPA thinks of agriculture and farming? You know, the fact is that our state has the ability and the right to change the amendments and to say, you know what, we don't necessarily agree with the federal government. This is how we're going to do it in the state of Missouri. Does that amendment change the definition to where the EPA needs to just, you know, step aside?
I don't know the answer to that question. Look at it.
And I'll give an opine, because I don't have any legal training. And until somebody takes it to court, we don't know. So, Councilmember Moorhead?
This is for question to Councilmember Odugawa. With your proposal here, are you suggesting that we adopt your proposed amendments and not the city's staff's, or should they take time and review it and maybe incorporate some of your suggestions and come back with a new proposal?
I just wasn't, like I said, when I was looking through the packet and all the suggestions made by EPA and DNR, and then looking at the draft, I just wasn't seeing that those suggestions were incorporated. So I was almost questioning whether the goal tonight was to work on this further because they hadn't done the things that EPA and DNR had suggested, or, I mean, I wasn't sure. I just wanted to kind of to get it straight in my mind to look at, okay, well, this says this and it's not changed, and, you know, and also to find out why. You know, is there a reason why that wasn't changed, or is there more information that we don't have?
If I may, what I would suggest, because you do have a number of proposals on there.
Yeah, it wasn't finished, so it's not adopted this instead of that.
What I would suggest is we go with the draft as defined by staff. You have some specific questions that you could address with staff. The comment that you made earlier about the letter, the email being contradictory in nature in a couple of spots, I caught the same thing. What I would propose is that we go ahead with this draft, move forward with it. If there are changes that are needed, make motion to make those changes when the ordinance comes up, and then we can hash that out. But if you're going to do that, or if anybody is going to suggest changes, substantial changes, we'll probably want to have a separate work session again in order to discuss those changes. But the first step is to better learn why the confusion is there. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Mayor, to follow up, I mean, my comments set aside regarding the email from Ms. Wallace, with the suggestions here, I think since these are very specific, I guess I would request that city staff at least take a quick look at these. If there's something that could quickly modify or adjust that would not go against the general premise of their amendment, that be considered and run by Joe. That way, if there is something small that could be considered, that it be considered. I guess I'm with Councilmember Westcoat that this is a work in progress, that we get something implemented, we may move on, but if it's something quick or small that could be changed, that staff be able to.
And I agree, and I think Councilmember Delgado could have that conversation with staff and work through it. Our council here has given us indication already why something can't be removed, and I think he gave a good opinion there. So, Councilmember Westcoat.
And not to be disrespectful to anyone with the DNR, do we know Mrs. Wallace's background, whether or not she's actually, is she an appointed position within the DNR? Is this actually somebody that's, hired in with the background and the qualifications? When one person offers their opinion, and clearly it's their opinion, isn't it fair to for us to actually take the position where, unless it's backed up by the group, or is it just, does she have the final say for the DNR? I guess that's what I'm trying to get to. Or is she just the front person? I don't know all the inner workings of the DNR and what layers they are. Is she the bottom layer, and there's 15 levels above her, somebody else that would have a differing opinion from her? Was she just the one who happened to get the email forwarded to, and they said, hey, why don't you answer this?
I'm going to let Mr. Krass answer that. He's had most of the contact with her. The only thing that I, as a reader, because like you all, I kind of got the stuff at the same time, that probably the most confusing thing to me was in one of her initial emails back, she talked about all of the different versions she had. We're not really clear on what version she was talking about, because at that time there were really only two versions: what was actually in play, what we have in place right now, and then the first draft that we wanted to change. So we're really not sure what she was talking about there, but I'll let Mike speak to what her role with the DNR is. He would know better than I.
She is the coordinator of the MS4 program and does oversee the requirements of the discharge permit. But I would point out that, as Jim stated earlier, the DNR, the EPA, they are not going to approve this ordinance. So take their comments are simply just that, what their impressions are, what they feel makes a good ordinance. I would like to address a couple more of your comments, Ms. Abdagawad. With regards to the EPA and their buffer requirements, they're not aware that we did a comprehensive watershed study that established the buffers, that actually established the buffers. The one thing they did do was detailed analysis of the various stream orders to determine what kind of an average buffer width was. So that EPA doesn't have the benefit of that. So the fallback with that is we did a comprehensive plan, and that would be our response, because every watershed is different, every stream's different, every buffer requirements are different based on the characteristics of the watershed. Our fallback is we did a comprehensive study of our city to determine what the appropriate buffers are.
Councilmember Holman?
I just had one minor thing. Obviously, you guys spent a lot of time on this, and you put forward a product that you think is pretty good, and we've heard a good case for that. Staff's been all on board. I just want to verify something that Mr. Willer said. There was a question, and I don't know. Was the comment about the agricultural exemption, and I just wanted to verify that we were going to, you were going to review that to make sure that we did have what we wanted in there, and make any necessary changes if there were any.
Absolutely. No, after we'll speak with Councilmember Abdelgawad, we'll be looking at the agricultural exemption. We'll be looking at it in conjunction with the possible changes in the law that may apply, and move forward with that particular product after all of those August 25th.
Thank you.
And can we mark that mic stand there and make sure Jay gets it every time?
Actually, Mr. Mayberg is sitting back there looking at me through the glass right now, wondering.
Other comments? Go ahead.
I just have one quick question that I think got lost in my 10 minutes. And I don't remember hearing the answer. Sorry if I missed it. Once we contact the Corps to find out if it's a jurisdictional stream, how do we then come back to our watershed management plan to find out the order of that stream? Is that from the plan that the developer gets, or is the Corps going to tell us the order of the streams? On
No,
their property?
there's a definite definition of the stream and or the stream order and how we determine the stream order. Bear with me just a second. It's based on the Strather methodology, and so it's really looking at the topography. Once they've identified the streams on the map, it's a matter of looking at whether or not the stream has multiple tributaries or a single tributary. But we could certainly make that part of the paperwork that they submit, even whether it's included in the jurisdictional determination. It certainly can become part of the report they submit to us, is to take a look at the stream orders and identify the stream orders.
So it's something staff will,
We can look at and verify, or they can, it's a recognized methodology that the developer can submit along with the other information.
And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong on this, the order, if I were going out, I would have to request a preliminary jurisdictional determination from the Corps, correct? If there were streams determined to be on my property, I would have to ask for that, is that correct?
Correct, and then based on, once the streams are identified, you can identify the order of the stream.
And when the Corps gets back to you, do they give guidance on what the order of the stream is?
No, that's not their purview. We would follow the definition in the watershed management plan for what the order of the streams are.
just another quick question kind of along this line, since we didn't see information from the Corps. Does the Corps recognize streams that don't always contain water? I know that's one of the big concerns I've heard, that the Corps only recognizes navigable streams. That's something that's come up in our discussions before. Is the Corps only going to recognize streams that contain water? Because there are important streams that oftentimes don't have water.
There are new draft regulations being promulgated, or definitions of what waters the Corps has jurisdiction over. And I'm quoting from an EPA news release. Specifically, the proposed rule clarifies that under the Clean Water Act and based on the science, most seasonal rain-dependent streams are protected. That's virtually every single stream in Raymore. The vast majority of our streams are rain dependent. They're not groundwater fed, so that would be the intermittent type streams.
Other questions, comments? All right, you'll get with Councilmember Abdel-Galah and go through that, and then bring this before the council once everything's dressed up.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, great. And I don't believe we have reason to go into executive session.
We do not.
All right.
Just a calendar reminder,
Okay.
tomorrow night is Ward 4. Visit with the city manager if you've got anything you want to talk about. And we can set up a time. I'll talk with staff tomorrow and get a time when everybody could sit down. Great.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening. We're in adjournment.